At 4:03 in the morning, a man walked out of the darkness. He was soaking wet. He was alone, and according to his own account, he had been adrift in the open water of the Abacos for nearly 9 hours. The night watchman at Marsh Harbor Boatyard had seen a lot of things working the overnight shift. Storms rolling in without warning, drunk sailors stumbling back from shore, men crying over broken boats and broken marriages. But he had never seen anything quite like this. The man who emerged from the darkness that night was Brian Hooker, and he had a story to tell. The problem, as investigators and witnesses would soon discover, is that the story Brian Hooker told the night watchman that morning did not match the story he told Fire and Rescue an hour later. It did not match what he told police. It did not match the weather data. It did not match the photographs. And it did not match the physical evidence found aboard his 46-foot sailing vessel, Soulmate. This is the story of Lynette Hooker, a woman who loved the ocean, a woman who, by all accounts, was thriving, a woman who, on the night of April 4, 2025, simply, according to her husband, fell off the back of a rubber dinghy and was never seen again. The question investigators have been asking ever since is not only, what happened to Lynette Hooker? The question, the one that refuses to go away, is this: why does every single account Brian Hooker has given of that night contain something that cannot be true? This is the Crime Files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. It is the kind of place where locals know one another by boat name as readily as by surname, where news travels fast and secrets travel faster. Lynette Hooker was 52 years old at the time of her disappearance. By every available account, she was a woman who had embraced the live-aboard sailing lifestyle with genuine enthusiasm. She and her husband Brian had been living aboard their 1980 Morgan sloop, named Soulmate, sailing through the Bahamas chain and documenting their journey on social media. Friends and family describe Lynette as warm, competent, and deeply engaged in the day-to-day life of cruising. She snorkeled. She swam with stingrays. She visited beach bars. She managed the practical demands of life at anchor. She wore an Apple Watch with a powder pink band, photographed clearly on her wrist in images taken just hours before she disappeared. She kept a bright green dry bag for her personal items. She dressed for the tropics: cover-ups, a royal blue headscarf, an aqua bathing suit. She was not a novice. She was not careless. She was not fragile. Brian Hooker, 56, is Lynette's husband, and he served in the United States Marine Corps. Those who knew the couple describe him as tech-savvy and self-sufficient, a man who took pride in his gear, his connectivity, his systems. He used AI tools. He tracked everything digitally. He connected his devices to apps, to cloud services, to a Starlink satellite internet terminal mounted at the top of Soulmate's mast. He is, in other words, exactly the kind of person who leaves a digital footprint everywhere he goes. At the time of this documentary, Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. He is the subject of 2 active criminal investigations, one by the Royal Bahamas Police Force and one by the United States Coast Guard Investigative Service, a federal law enforcement agency with jurisdiction over crimes aboard vessels under U.S. flag. Lynette Hooker has not been found. Her body has not been recovered. Her green dry bag has not been found. Her Apple Watch has not been found, though investigators believe it was left aboard Soulmate. The search continues, and the questions are multiplying. April 2, 2025. Great Guana Cay. AIS vessel tracking records and geolocation data embedded in the Hooker's social media posts place Brian and Lynette at Great Guana Cay on April 2nd. On that date, the couple had their scuba tanks refilled at a dive facility on the island. This detail, seemingly minor at the time, becomes significant in context of what investigators would later find aboard Soulmate. 2 days before Lynette disappeared, both scuba tanks were full. On the day she disappeared, there is no recorded or witnessed evidence of any scuba diving activity. The question of how much air remains in each tank and whose tank shows evidence of use is one investigators are believed to be examining carefully. April 3, 2025. AIS tracking data shows Brian and Lynette moving Soulmate southward along the Abaco chain. They anchored overnight near the Firefly Inn. No witnesses have come forward with observations inconsistent with a normal day of sailing. April 4, 2025, 11:30 in the morning. AIS records show Soulmate's anchor being raised. The vessel proceeded south and re-anchored at AP Pat's Bay, a calm, protected anchorage on the leeward side of Elbow Cay, near the community of Hopetown. AP Pat's Bay is well traveled. Other boats were in the vicinity that day. The surrounding waters are extremely shallow, rarely deeper than 15 feet. Visibility in the water column is typically exceptional. April 4, 2025. Afternoon. Photographic and video evidence places both Brian and Lynette at Tahiti Beach during the afternoon. Tahiti Beach is a shallow sandbar at the southern tip of Elbow Cay, accessible by dinghy, known for its population of southern stingrays. Visitors wade in ankle to knee-deep water and patronize a floating bar nearby. The photographic record from this visit is important. Lynette is visibly wearing her Apple Watch in at least one photograph, a detail that becomes critical when investigators note that her watch was later found aboard Soulmate, on a boat she allegedly never reached. Also critical, the water conditions captured in photographs taken that afternoon. Multiple witnesses and the images themselves confirm the surface was calm, glassy, without significant wave action. Following the beach visit, the couple proceeded by dinghy to the Abaco Inn, a restaurant and bar on Elbow Cay, with a protected harbor approach from the Sea of Abaco side. Brian Hooker has stated that he and Lynette spent time at the Abaco Inn. He places their departure at approximately 7:30 in the evening. This timing is where the first serious contradiction in his account emerges. April 4th, 2025, 7:00 p.m., the first lie. In the account Brian Hooker provided to Edward Smith, the overnight security guard at the Marsh Harbor Boatyard, Hooker stated that Lynette went overboard at approximately 7:00 in the evening. In the account he provided to Fire and Rescue, he placed the incident at approximately 8:00 in the evening, 1 full hour. That is not a rounding error. At 7:00 p.m. on April 4th, 2025, in the Abaco Islands at that latitude, there is still meaningful light in the sky. Sunset does not occur until approximately 7:45 to 7:55 p.m. At 7:00 p.m., the sky is bright enough to see a person in the water at close range, especially in calm, shallow, crystal-clear Bahamian water. At 8:00 p.m., darkness would have been nearly complete. It arrives fast in the tropics. Brian Hooker's account to Fire and Rescue specifically invokes darkness as the reason he lost sight of Lynette. That explanation is barely coherent with an 8:00 p.m. incident. It is completely incoherent with 7:00 p.m. At 7:00 p.m., other boats were at anchor nearby. The boatyard lights were visible from the water. Tahiti Beach, Lubbers Quarters, and multiple shore facilities were within easy reach. If Lynette went into the water at 7:00 p.m. in full late daylight, in 4 to 15 feet of clear water, surrounded by vessels and people, the question of why absolutely no one saw her, heard her, or found her becomes almost impossible to answer. April 4th, 2025, approximately 7:30 p.m., departure from the Abaco Inn. Hooker states he and Lynette left the Abaco Inn by dinghy at around 7:30 p.m., headed back to Soulmate, roughly 12 minutes away under normal conditions. He states that during the transit, Lynette went overboard. He says he tried to rescue her, but wave conditions and current separated them. He says she was swimming, and here is where his account fractures completely. To Fire and Rescue, he said she was swimming toward the boat, toward Soulmate, which lay to the south. To the night watchman, Edward Smith, he said she was swimming toward Hopetown, to the north. North, south, these are opposite directions. A person cannot be simultaneously swimming north and south. That single contradiction, told to two different people within hours of each other, is not the kind of mistake a man makes in shock. It is the kind of mistake a man makes when he is inventing. April 4th, 2025, 7:30 p.m. to approximately 4 a.m., the 9-hour drift. Brian Hooker's account of the 8 to 9 hours between Lynette's alleged disappearance and his arrival at the boatyard is the most scrutinized element of this entire case. He states that after losing Lynette, he could not return to Soulmate because he had lost one oar, and because Lynette, carrying the dinghy's ignition key in her dry bag, had taken it with her when she went overboard. Without the key, he could not start the motor. He states he drifted 4 miles across the Abacus using a single remaining oar, that he passed within 150 yards of the brightly lit Marsh Harbor Boatyard and chose not to paddle toward it, that he instead continued past the lights, navigated through dense dark mangroves, knocked on 2 doors in a residential area nearby, received no help, and then somehow made his way back to the boatyard on foot, arriving at 4:05 a.m. He states he fired 2 signal flares during this journey, one at a passing vessel, one at a second vessel. Both ignored him. Every single one of these claims has been challenged by physical evidence, witness testimony, or basic maritime logic. And what happened on his watch in the early hours of April 5th turned out to be the crack that opened the entire case. According to the account Smith provided to Fox News Digital, Brian Hooker walked up to him soaking wet and immediately asked for water. Smith asked what happened. Hooker told him they were returning by dinghy from a bar in Hopetown. First problem, they were not coming from Hopetown. They were coming from the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay. Hopetown is a separate community to the north. Different location, different route, different direction entirely. Smith noted the timing immediately. 7 p.m. incident, 4 a.m. arrival. He asked Hooker to explain the gap. Hooker said the wind was strong. The dinghy drifted away from Lynette in the dark, and he could not see her. He told Smith that Lynette was swimming toward Hopetown, northward, with a yellow bag. Stop there! In every other account Hooker gave, Lynette was swimming toward the boat, south, toward Soulmate. To Smith, she was swimming north. toward Hopetown, and the bag. Lynette Hooker's dry bag was green, bright green, confirmed by multiple sources. Brian Hooker's dry bag, the one Smith observed when Hooker arrived at the boatyard, was yellow. In the account Hooker gave the night watchman, Lynette was swimming away in the dark carrying a yellow bag. The yellow bag was Brian's. Lynette's bag was green. This is not a grief-stricken husband misremembering a color in the chaos of a traumatic night. This is a man who, when constructing his story on the spot for a new audience, got the details wrong because they were not drawn from memory. They were invented. And invented details have a way of betraying the people who create them. Edward Smith, the night watchman, clearly observed a yellow bag when Hooker arrived at the boatyard at 4:03 a.m. Approximately an hour later, when Hooker boarded the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue vessel, the crew's recollections diverge. Jim Todd, a senior and highly respected figure in the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue, has stated that Hooker was carrying a royal blue dry bag. He also specifically described what Hooker was wearing: a blue and white Hawaiian-style shirt in a breathable athletic fabric and royal blue slides. A second crew member remembered the bag as aqua blue. A third crew member had no clear recollection of the bag at all. A fourth crew member remembered the bag as yellow and used the phrase from the beginning. Now, a yellow bag at the boatyard, a blue or aqua bag on the rescue vessel, and a third crew member who specifically recalls a blue bag being thrown up onto Soulmate's deck when the rescue vessel pulled alongside so that Hooker and a police officer could board. And when Brian Hooker departed Soulmate after spending approximately 1 hour below deck with that officer, he left the bag behind. So a yellow bag appears at the boatyard at 4:03 a.m. A blue bag appears on the rescue vessel. That blue bag ends up left aboard Soulmate. Where did the second bag come from? Where is the first one now? And is either of them Lynette's green bag? These questions do not yet have confirmed answers. But they are questions that investigators examining Soulmate with a fine-tooth comb are almost certainly asking. In the account he gave Edward Smith, Hooker stated he fired 2 flares during his drift across the Abacos. One at a passing vessel that failed to stop, a second at another vessel that also failed to stop. Let us be very clear about what a maritime flare means. A flare is not a courtesy wave. It is not a casual signal. Under international maritime law, a flare is a universal distress call. Any vessel that observes a flare and fails to render assistance is, in most jurisdictions, violating a legal obligation. The idea that 2 separate boats, on a calm night with no extreme weather, each observed a flare from a small vessel in distress and simply kept going, is something maritime professionals have described as essentially unbelievable. Now add the physical evidence. Information from sources familiar with the investigation indicates that the flare gun recovered from the dinghy, found at the bottom of the vessel, showed evidence of only 1 discharge, 1 flare fired, not 2. And here is where it gets more significant. Multiple witnesses on shore described observing a single flare that night, but they placed it at Soulmate's anchored position, not in the middle of the channel where Hooker claims he was drifting. If the flare was fired from Soulmate, not from an adrift dinghy, then someone was aboard Soulmate when it was fired. And if Hooker was aboard Soulmate, his entire account of drifting helplessly through the night collapses. Some witnesses described the flare as traveling horizontally. Others said it appeared vertical. Witness accounts of flare trajectories are complicated by observation angle, atmospheric conditions, and memory. This documentary does not treat any single account as definitive, but the totality, 1 discharge mark, witnesses placing the origin at Soulmate, and Hooker claiming 2 separate flares fired from an adrift dinghy, is a contradiction investigators cannot walk past. But the geography of the route he describes makes it extremely difficult to accept. The Abaco chain in this area is not open ocean. It is a network of shallow channels, small cays, mangrove systems, and populated anchorages. Between AP Pat's Bay and Marsh Harbor, there are multiple opportunities to reach shore, flag a passing vessel, or make contact with another human being. Lubber's Quarters, a cay with a restaurant and bar, sits roughly halfway along his claimed drift route. Hooker has stated he anchored near Lubber's Quarters at some point during the night and then chose to keep drifting rather than stay put, wait for daylight, and signal for help. He also stated that as he approached Marsh Harbor, he could see the boatyard lights, and that he passed within 150 yards of them. 150 yards. That is 1.5 football fields on a calm night in a rubber dinghy with 1 oar. The reasonable expectation of any person in genuine distress, with a missing wife and 9 hours of open water behind him, would be to paddle toward the only beacon of light he could see from 150 yards away. Brian Hooker says he paddled past it. He then claims to have navigated through dense, dark mangrove and scrub to a residential area, knocked on 2 doors, received no response, and returned to the boatyard, on foot, in the dark, through terrain that Jim Todd of Hopetown Fire and Rescue has described as including a significant watery or wetland area not easily crossed in daylight, let alone at 3 or 4 in the morning after 9 hours at Sea. Multiple people familiar with this specific geography have described that account as implausible. Coast Guard Investigative Service agents intercepted the vessel approximately 40 miles offshore and towed it to the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida. It is currently held under crime scene designation. Daily forensic activity has been observed. Agents boarding and departing, items removed in evidence bags. The examination has been ongoing for weeks. The boat, in investigative terms, is a data vault. Modern live-aboard sailing vessels, particularly those operated by someone as technology-oriented as Brian Hooker, are equipped with sophisticated electronic systems, navigation instruments, AIS transponders, battery management systems, power monitoring logs, onboard networking, and in the case of Soulmate, a Starlink satellite internet terminal mounted at the top of the mast. Starlink is a satellite internet service operated by SpaceX. When a device connects to a Starlink network, a phone, a smartwatch, a tablet, that connection event is potentially logged. The system knows when a device came online and from where. Brian Hooker has stated that on the night of April 4th, he and Lynette never came close to Soulmate after leaving the Abaco Inn. His account places the entire incident well short of the vessel. If the Starlink terminal aboard Soulmate recorded connections from devices associated with Brian Hooker during the hours he claims to have been adrift far from the boat, that is a direct and potentially decisive contradiction of everything he has said. Investigators are believed to be examining exactly this. Then there is the artificial intelligence question. In the days following Lynette's disappearance, Brian Hooker sent Jim Todd of Hopetown Fire and Rescue a series of text messages, and with them, maps. Cartoon-style, illustrated maps showing the route Hooker claimed to have drifted, annotated with arrows and notations. Investigation into the origin of those maps indicates that Hooker created them using Gemini, Google's AI assistant. That fact on its own tells investigators two things. First, Hooker had internet access and device connectivity while creating those maps, meaning his devices were functional and connected during the period surrounding Lynette's disappearance. Second, if Gemini was used to create the maps, Gemini usage logs may show what else was searched for and when. AI prompt histories have been used in criminal proceedings before. They can establish knowledge, intent, and planning. If those logs show queries about concealment, water depth, remote beaches, or navigation to isolated locations, and if those queries were made during the hours Hooker claims he was helplessly drifting without power, investigators would treat that as deeply significant. The Coast Guard Investigative Service has the legal authority to compel the production of those records. Lynette Hooker's Apple Watch was recovered aboard Soulmate. If Lynette went overboard from a dinghy before that dinghy reached Soulmate, as Brian Hooker has stated, her watch would not be on Soulmate. There is no explanation in Hooker's known accounts for how his wife's watch came to be on a boat she allegedly never reached. But the location of the watch is only part of the story. The Apple Watch is not a passive device. Depending on the model and software version, it records heart rate data continuously, logs movement and GPS location, timestamps activity, and, when connected to a network, transmits that data to cloud servers. In legal proceedings, Apple Watch health data has been used to establish the physiological state of a wearer at a specific moment in time. Sudden cessation of heart rate readings, irregular patterns during a critical window, absence of movement data where movement should have been recorded. If Lynette Hooker's Apple Watch contains health data from the evening of April 4th, that data speaks directly to the question of when and under what circumstances she was last alive. Investigators are aware of this. The watch is believed to be in federal custody as part of the Soulmate evidence collection. It may turn out to be the most important object in this entire case. On April 2nd, 2 days before Lynette disappeared, both scuba tanks were freshly filled at Great Guana Cay. There is no record of any diving on April 3rd or 4th. Both tanks should be full, or very close to it. If either tank shows significant air depletion, if the pressure is meaningfully lower than a freshly filled tank would register, the question becomes unavoidable. When was that air used, and for what? Lynette is photographed wearing a weight distribution vest, a buoyancy control device where ballast weights are integrated directly into the vest structure. These weights are designed to overcome a person's natural buoyancy. A properly weighted diver sinks. Remove the weights and the person rises. Add more weight than the system is designed to carry, and the effect is the opposite of positive buoyancy. Investigators examining the scuba gear aboard Soulmate would logically be checking whether the weight configuration is consistent with normal diving use, or whether something has been added, removed, or altered. This is theory. This documentary presents it as such. But it is theory built on the physical properties of the equipment and the timeline of the case. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. The available evidence does not support this. Photographs taken at Tahiti Beach during the afternoon of April 4th show water that is calm, glassy. Multiple witnesses confirm it. The leeward anchorage at AP Pat's Bay is sheltered from Atlantic swells by the landmass of Elbow Cay. That is why it is an anchorage. Vessels go there specifically because the water is calm. Local sailors and marine professionals familiar with the location have described conditions that evening as near calm on the anchorage side, and rain. Weather records indicate that rain may have occurred at some point during the evening hours of April 4th. Rain in a tropical island chain during the night is not unusual, but it is the kind of detail, being rained on for hours while adrift and alone in an open dinghy after losing your wife, that virtually every person would mention, every time, without prompting. Brian Hooker has not mentioned it in any known account. If it rained and he never mentioned it, that is curious. If it rained and he was not on that dinghy, that explains everything. This matters in the context of his stated behavior that night. Marine Corps training is designed to produce individuals who remain functional under extreme stress, who adapt to adverse conditions, who do not abandon the people in their charge, and who use available resources to survive and protect. Marines are trained in water survival. They are trained to navigate in darkness. They are trained not to give up when options still exist. Multiple maritime professionals have observed that the behaviors Brian Hooker describes, anchoring near lubbers' quarters and then continuing to drift rather than staying put and signaling for help, passing within 150 yards of a lit facility and not paddling toward it, 9 hours of passive drifting while his wife was allegedly in the water, are not consistent with the instincts and training that Marine Corps service typically produces. This is not proof of anything. Trauma is real. Shock produces behavior that looks wrong from the outside. Courts have long recognized there is no single correct way to respond to loss. This documentary presents the behavioral inconsistencies as investigative context, not as conclusions. But they sit alongside everything else. The contradictions in the timing, the bag that changed color, the direction that flipped from north to south, the flare that witnesses say came from the wrong location, the watch on a boat the victim never boarded. At some point, the pile of inconsistencies becomes something a jury will have to weigh. The Royal Bahamas Police Force detained Brian Hooker following Lynette's disappearance. He was held, his personal items were temporarily collected, and he was subsequently released. His watches? He appears to have worn 2 different watches at different times. A white model and a darker green-black model were returned to him upon release. The watches matter because smartwatches log data, GPS position, heart rate, activity. If the watch Hooker wore on April 4th recorded his location during the hours he claims to have been adrift, and if that location data places him somewhere other than an open dinghy drifting across the Abacos, that is evidence. The Coast Guard Investigative Service is the primary federal investigative body on this case. CGIS operates under the Department of Homeland Security with full federal law enforcement authority, the ability to execute search warrants, compel production of digital records, and pursue federal criminal charges. It was CGIS that seized Soulmate. It was CGIS that has been conducting daily forensic examination of the vessel at Fort Pierce. Sources familiar with the investigation have indicated that the examination has been productive, that items investigators hope to find were found aboard the boat. The investigation is active. No charging timeline has been announced. But every day that agents board Soulmate and remove evidence bags, the digital picture gets clearer. No physical trace of her, no body, no dry bag, no clothing, no headscarf, no fanny pack has been located in the waters or on the shores of the Abaco chain. Marine professionals and rescue experts who know these waters say this, in itself, is the most significant fact of all. The waters around AP Pat's Bay are not the open Atlantic. The average depth is 4 to 15 feet. The clarity is extraordinary, among the best in the world. Search resources were deployed within hours of the reported incident. Locals, volunteers, and professionals searched for days. If a person went into the water where Brian Hooker says Lynette went into the water, under the conditions he describes, there would be something to find. Marine rescue professionals use the term particle, the physical material left behind when a body has been in open water. Even if the worst had happened, even if marine life had been involved, there would be something. There is nothing. The collective conclusion of experienced marine search professionals is consistent. Lynette Hooker did not enter the water at the location Brian Hooker has described, which means she went somewhere else. And the question of where and how and under what circumstances is what investigators are working to answer. Volunteer searchers continue to walk shorelines and mangrove edges. They film beaches above the high tide line. They document isolated stretches of coast that a person could reach from the water in darkness without being seen. The search goes on. Theory 1. Accidental drowning, as Brian Hooker has stated. Strengths. Accidental drowning is real. People fall from dinghies. People drown in calm water if they are panicked, injured, or impaired. Weaknesses. The weather evidence contradicts the claim of rough water. The contradictions in Hooker's account are numerous and material. The absence of any physical trace in waters that should have yielded one is not explained. The Apple Watch found on a boat Lynette allegedly never reached is not explained. The evidence supports parts of this theory, but it leaves critical gaps. Theory 2. Death aboard Soulmate remains concealed on land. Strengths. It accounts for the total absence of material in the water. It is consistent with evidence suggesting Hooker may have been aboard Soulmate during hours he claims to have been adrift. Weaknesses. Concealing a body on a small, populated island chain in darkness while simultaneously staging an accident would be extraordinarily difficult. No burial site has been found. The evidence supports parts of this theory, but it leaves critical gaps. Theory 3. Death aboard Soulmate remains disposed of at sea. Strengths. Explains the complete absence of recoverable material. Consistent with the AIS record showing Soulmate did not move that night, suggesting any transit to deeper water required other means. Potentially consistent with anomalies in the scuba tank record. Weaknesses. Highly speculative without physical evidence. Logistically complex. The evidence supports parts of this theory, but it leaves critical gaps. This documentary does not choose a side. The investigation is open. The evidence is still being gathered. A courtroom, if it comes to that, will be where these theories are tested against proof. Brian Hooker has not been charged with any crime. 2 criminal investigations are active. Soulmate is held under federal seizure at Fort Pierce. Daily forensic work continues. Lynette Hooker has not been found. The digital evidence landscape available to investigators is vast. The Starlink connection logs, the onboard GPS and navigation history, the battery management system records, the AI usage logs from Brian Hooker's devices, Lynette's Apple Watch health data, any biological or forensic material recovered from the interior of the vessel. Any one of these, if it contradicts Brian Hooker's account, could change the course of this investigation overnight. All of them together, if they align, could be decisive. The questions that Edward Smith asked in the first moments of that 4:03 a.m. encounter have not gone away. They have only grown sharper. Why does the time keep changing? Why does the direction keep reversing? Why does the bag keep changing color? Why does a man drift for 9 hours, pass within 150 yards of safety, and keep going? Why is his wife's watch on a boat she never reached? Why is there nothing in the water? Those questions will be answered in a courtroom, or they will hang in the air for years, unanswered, unresolved, the way too many cases involving missing women end up. But the people who knew Lynette Hooker are not letting this one go. The volunteers walking those beaches are not letting this one go. The federal agents boarding Soulmate every morning are not letting this one go. And neither are we. She loved sailing. She loved the life she and her husband had built aboard Soulmate. She loved snorkeling in shallow, clear sea. She wore her powder pink Apple Watch and her aqua cover-up and her royal blue headscarf. She carried a green dry bag. She was, by every account of everyone who knew her, fully alive in the life she was living. Whatever happened to Lynette Hooker on the night of April 4th, 2025, has not yet been determined by any court of law. But the record of what Brian Hooker has said, and the ways in which those statements contradict themselves, contradict the physical evidence, and contradict the people who met him in the hours after, has been laid out here, as fully and as accurately as the available evidence permits. This isn't just a story. It's a real life, a real family, and a case that may still have answers waiting to be found. The search for truth continues.